Right, welcome back everyone to Black and Briefed, our history on the ballot. And today we have another great interview. Today we have Amanda Hollowell, who is running for Georgia's 1st Congressional District. She is a nationally recognized political strategist and the chief of campaigns at Color of Change, the country's largest online racial justice organization. She brings decades of experience in organizing, advocacy, and leadership to the campaign trail with deep roots in Georgia's 1st Congressional District. She has led transformative campaigns for voting rights, economic justice, and healthcare across the South and beyond. She has mobilized thousands of volunteers, managed multi-million-dollar initiatives, and helped push progressive policies from ideas into action. Prior to joining Color of Change, she directed national organizing at When We All Vote and led campaign strategy at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute and 9 to 5 Georgia. Her leadership has been recognized by Essence, Forbes, USA Today, Black Enterprise, Georgia Trend Magazine, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and the Savannah Business Journal's Generation Next Award. Amanda is also a proud mom and a full-time caregiver to her father, a military veteran, two roles that ground her commitment to service and community. So before we get started, a quick note. As always, this conversation is educational in nature. It is not an endorsement of any one candidate or party. This is for civic engagement and education. There are no agendas here, but we're going to talk plainly about the issues that matter the most, especially to the Black community. So Amanda, I'm so glad to have you this morning. Thank you. Let's kind of get into how your background influences and informs now your decision to run for office. You've been organizing in the Southeast for over 20 years. What made you decide that now is the time to run?
We just have an amazing opportunity here. And so for about 20 years, the seat has been locked in with Republican led Congress folks. And this seat is now open because that congressman who holds this seat is now deciding to run for Senate in Georgia. And so, I talked about it with my family, talked about it with my job, talked about it with my friends and network. And we all saw an amazing opportunity to be able to put forth a candidate who's really, you know, dug deep and organized and activated and really helped people in the 1st Congressional District. And that's me. And I care deeply about this community and I care deeply about the opportunities we have in order to make this place better. And not just Southeast Georgia, but like the whole country.
So for those who may not know, what areas comprise the 1st Congressional District of Georgia?
Oh my goodness, it is pretty vast. It's a vast landmass, and so we have 15 counties, and there's two bordering cities, and so we're talking about from a little piece of Effingham County all the way down to Camden, all the way over to Wayne County or Waycross, and then we come in coastal all the way into Chatham, Glen, and Brunswick, and so it is this little like hook of a C shape on the coast and inland of Georgia that has just an amazing group of diverse folks who, I really want to see a better future for themselves and are really hurting in this moment under this administration.
So a lot of people know how to talk about communities like this one, but you actually live in this community. What's the difference between someone who studies the district versus someone who actually is bred there and lives there and is a part of the lay of the land?
The stories and the moments that you just can't describe through data and research. And though I am very policy wonk, data, centered person, I know when I talk to folks in Waycross and they tell me these stories about, we're worried about how the trains cross because they delay the emergency vehicles taking folks to the hospital. And because that's an issue, it's because also that their next emergency rooms are 45 minutes to an hour away. And when you hear those stories and connect all the dots, you see where the policy is going wrong, but you also see how people are directly impacted. And so, yesterday I did my campaign kickoff launch and just hearing stories from mothers and from senior citizens and from just general public who are one enthusiastic, but also vulnerable in this moment and are willing to really share those intimate and sometimes embarrassing things that are happening because of the nature of our policy.
So you are a mother, you are a caregiver, you're a daughter, and now you're running a congressional campaign. How are you holding all of these hats together? And what do these roles tell us about why you're doing this?
If anything, it tells them I'm built for this. I understand the hard challenge. I've taken hard challenges before in my life when I did education around healthcare and organ donation to registering almost 7,000 people across the state of Georgia when I was at 9 to 5 Georgia. I think more than anything, one thing I do talk plainly about my life is that I love to execute. I like to ideate, but boy, I will cut that off real fast if I see we're just going to start talking in circles and there's no move to action. We can't prove our theories and we can't prove that we're right about how policy should move if we don't put it in action. And so I always get disappointed when someone wants to kick something down the can or we move something to a committee or a study because I'm like, okay, we're just delaying the inevitable when people need help right now.
So that kind of seems to be the lay of the land in politics right now. Things move extremely slowly. And I know a lot of Democratic voters are fed up of politics as usual, fed up of waiting until the right time, the right opportunity for change to actually happen. So, how do you balance who you are, right? This person who wants to execute and get stuff done versus how politics currently looks and is moving, which is let's wait till the right time or let's reach across the aisle to get some commonality.
Yeah, I think we've now passed the right time. The right time is now. What I do love in my full time job, I do advocacy. So I'm calling folks call their local representative, have them folks call their Congress folks to really speak of the urgency that we need to take actions now. I don't think it's so much the bureaucracy, but I think it's the will and the want to be bold in this moment. And I just don't think we have enough folks who are close enough to the pain to understand that folks need action now. We need to answer and pause and stop these harmful policies that are impacting so many different people. And we need to move with the speed at which the cruelty is being doled out. And so I hope, what I bring to is a new energy of, it might not be perfect, but it's good enough to get us someplace, to get us going and get us started, and we can perfect it along. That is, a deep concern of mine. I hear it all the time. And I also think there's not enough education and transparency in how things move and work and why they go the way they go or why they're stalled out. And I would love to also be a part of that movement when I'm elected in Congress is to be a lot more transparent about why things are going the way they are and why we can't do stuff. But more so, I want to be the elected officials telling you why we're about to do stuff.
So I think that some of the sentiment that a lot of people have felt, especially in this current administration and in recent times, is that the Democratic Party has not met the moment. There is still a lot of playing old politics and kind of being diplomatic at a time when people are demanding change. So, what do you think that you can do to bring more of a sense of urgency to your colleagues or your future colleagues and to the party in general to start delivering for voters?
Yeah. And I hear that. And one thing I just want to give a shout out to our justice system that since January 2025 has heard over more than 300 cases against this administration. And the folks who are your ACLUs, your SPLCs, the unions who are taking this administration to court who are winning. I think their win record is over 50% now. And, I always tell folks when the judge says pause or like legal terms injunction, that's not going to make national headlines, but it makes a huge impact of how we operate in this country and how folks' rights are being protected. And so just a shout out to all those lawyers who are doing the good work from in the lawyers committee, the legal defense fund, and OACP. I just don't want to say that nothing's happening. It's just, the legal part just never is, how they say, as sexy for the major headline. But boy, are they working and they are trying their hardest. I think hopefully by the time I'm elected, and I had this conversation with the voter yesterday, and they said, you don't talk enough about today's moments, which is Iran and, corruption and the Epstein files. And I said, unfortunately, I'm not an elected official. I'm just a voter just like you. Now, I would be disappointed if I'm in Congress in 11 months from now and we are still talking about Iran. And so I hope these folks that are currently elected and our leadership of the Democratic Party understand that now is the moment. We can't wait until we flip the House. We need to find those opportunities to stop this administration, be bold, have that courage because the voters want it. you can tell by the protests. You can see when people show up for No Kings. You can see the letters and the calls that y'all are getting that, right now is the moment that people want us to respond. And I hope that they move forward in this sense of urgency, and at least explain to folks where we are in this process of making sure we're holding this administration accountable.
Now, let's talk about an issue that I know is on your campaign website, and that is affordability, but also Black wealth. So Black wealth in this country has been intentionally suppressed through many different means, whether it's redlining, wage gaps, or predatory lending. What does your platform actually do to help close that gap for Black families in Georgia's 1st Congressional District?
I'm going to take from what I'm learning now around just the economics of it all is that we cannot talk about financial literacy and Black wealth if we don't actually talk about the reforms needed within the tax code and the economic system for which we operate in. And so, we can always decide, this is so on time. I had this conversation with my son. I said, I have done well in my life, but as a single mother, I know I'm still 2 years behind the person who does not look like me, and so on and so forth. And so, like, when we have economic booms, I'm always on the tail end of the economic boom and moving forward. Or even when I get promoted, I'm always, by the time I get the promotion and the raise in salary, I'm still 2 years behind by the average person, or we'll just say average white male, which is where we decide what the dollar is based on for how much you're worth, how much you get paid. And I say, so, like, we have to talk about that first before we can even get to Black wealth and financial literacy. Those of us who have been able to achieve wealth in this country, God bless it. And, it's more so come through entrepreneurship. But it is not as that capital is not accessible. And so we need to talk about that they're using technology now instead of forms and names. They use AI technology to actually make sure that we are weeded out of the process of getting capital. We look at the bailout for farmers that was $29 billion. But we know that's not going to cover every farm, and Black farmers are probably more than likely going to get left out. And that is another form of wealth growth and generational wealth growth that we are being squeezed out of intentionally by when you think about the rollbacks of DEI. Though Black folks have not, I would say explicitly been benefiting from the DEI policies universally across the board, it sure did make it easier to have that conversation of why we need more of a diverse populace involved in our economic system, involved in our workforce, and involved in our government. And so I just think we have to, before we can even talk about Black wealth, with 300,000 women who've been laid off since January 2020, we have talked about the systems and structures that need to be reformed or actually just dismantled. Before we can have a whole conversation is that actually attainable?
What are some of the unique challenges that you see coming out of your community when it comes to kind of closing that gap? Because I know that your community probably has different challenges than maybe like in Atlanta where I am, which is much more metropolitan, but we still share a commonality. There's still agriculture and farming, things that I think people sometimes take for granted, keep our economy moving. And in a place like Georgia, where you said, there are Black farmers, but they kind of get closed out of funding and things that they need. What are the unique challenges that you see your constituents facing, and what are your plans to help them?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest the biggest employer in this area is retail. And so what I see more so than anything is that it's a large population of folks under 35, even 40 are participating in low income wage jobs with no ladder to grow. And that's probably the biggest bottleneck you will see in Southeast Georgia. And so, add that to the fact that healthcare costs are going up, housing is going up. We are now creating a deficit within this community, and folks cannot just work your way out of it. We can't, Uber, Lyft, and a full-time job our way out of it, because we also, population density for those type of gig economies only are in Savannah. But if you live 2.5 hours away from Savannah, you're losing money trying to do these type of gig works to increase your income. And so I just really hope that we talk about, that we need intentional investment in our technical skills that help folks get into the agriculture business or work in manufacturing or work in the port. We hear this a lot from when manufacturers or large corporations want to come settle down in the South, and they say it in Atlanta too. Y'all's labor force is not prepared to come and work for us. Fair. But that's because we need to intentionally invest in public education and offer different forms of levels of education for folks, especially in high school, that might want to go to a tech school, that might want to get a certificate instead of going to the traditional route of a 4-year degree. I can give a great example of my son who has a 4-year degree, college graduate in graphic design, but has decided he wants to work with his hands. And so he's now entering an apprenticeship with the Electric Workers Union to learn to do that. And that opportunity was because my friend has a nonprofit that gets young men from 18 to 25 apprenticeships within union structured jobs in the Southeast, but he can only service about 60 young men a year. But we need more of those type of an inside outside game. Inside with our public education in high school and how we offer technical high school, and also the hybrid of where folks are now doing where you can take a class that's called early college. So you can take college classes while you're still doing dual enrollment in high school, as well as boasting up these nonprofits who are offering, and labor unions who are offering low cost to zero cost ways of apprenticeship into jobs that will start you at 6 figures and above once you're done with your apprenticeship.
So, one of the defining factors of generating wealth in this particular country is through home ownership. Black families in Georgia, though, are being priced out of neighborhoods they've lived in for generations. As you stated, the rent is up, home prices are up, they're almost neck and neck at this point, but wages have kept at pace. They have not kept up with inflation. What is your plan to make housing affordable, and who do you think is responsible for fixing this?
We're all responsible at every level of government, and we're also responsible as business owners as well. When I think about some of the things I want to advocate for is, it's about time to have this conversation about how do we describe what poverty is in this country and what is that salary that's attached to that. Also, our minimum wage. Come on now. We have not adjusted the minimum wage in, 20 plus years in this country. And that actually helps folks who want to be stricter around budgets do the argument of why Georgia doesn't need to increase its minimum wage, because we're not doing it at the federal level, right? We need to do some things at the federal level in order to pressure these states that are refusing to move forward and really actually help the folks that are in their community. So first, it's of course increasing the minimum federal wage. These folks that are coming to Georgia that are building job centers, instead of just letting them build the facility that is a job center, like I gave a great example of Flexi in Brunswick, Georgia, or Glenn County, they should also think about how do you do workforce housing, right? And working with your county and your federal government of like, we've now created this job center. We understand that in this neighborhood around this job center, folks are being priced out, taxes are going higher, the wages are matching, and so folks are commuting in, and we're missing that, that part of that interior of labor that actually supports and facilitates these type of large job centers. And so what if we were to think about what would workforce housing look like, and making those credits that businesses can actually develop that are capped at certain renter prices in order to make sure workers are still being able to access their job and access a ways and means of living. And so I think we just don't use our imagination to our full extent. I think we start with the no and land on no instead of starting with, well, what if? What if we could just move some money around in our budget? What if we could work with the federal government on some advocacy? I'm telling you, when you help rural Georgia, you're helping the whole country because we are the folks who are in the margin. We are the folks who are seeing, most of the impacts of really bad policy on the national, state, and local level first. And so, we're just a vulnerable population. If we are able to improve our standard of living in the rural area and the coastal area, these are just case studies to improve it across further.
So, with the topic of rural Georgia also comes, I think, in my mind, the topic of healthcare access and insurance. So, we are about 4 months removed from the longest government shutdown in history, 40 days and 40 nights, over the topic of these ACA subsidies, which I know rural Georgia was going to be one of the most detrimentally impacted sectors based on the rollback of these ACA subsidies or the non-renewal of them. What do you think government's role is in ensuring that every person has access to quality healthcare? And have you started to see some of those impacts in your district regarding the lack of federal funding towards the extension of these subsidies?
Yeah. And just to be very clear, it's not a lack of federal funding. It is that our Georgia governor has chosen not to expand Medicaid. And that has serious reverberations in this community, especially in rural areas where hospitals are closing, because the lack of expansion of Medicaid means these hospitals and services do not get guaranteed pay for the care that they're offering. And because folks cannot go to a primary care on the regular basis, by the time they're showing up in the emergency room, they're at acute care and will need to be admitted and have to have, really some serious medical attention that is financially burdening on them, on the hospital and on the individual. And so I think what ACA did in Georgia was those tax credits during COVID, after COVID, what they did was they gave small businesses owners a way to provide health insurance. Though it wasn't like amazing and you were going to all the specials, it was something that, that they were able to afford and got more people insured in this state and especially in this area. I had some folks call me, she's a local therapist here, and she said, that's how I get my health care. And I will not be able to afford the premiums now that I can't get these tax credits. And I'm not going to decide to close my practice. Right. And so she, and I can't increase my practice. I can't say I want more sick people so I can pay for health insurance. I think I'm just going to have to go without and just, use the emergency room as a doctor, which is awful and does so many detrimental things to the community as a whole, as well as creating a backlog in services being provided for folks who are truly, at acute care and sickness. And so I think it's two things at once. I think, I want to be one of those folks who are sponsoring bills when I get into Congress that are extending those ACA tax credits for at least 10 years as we right the ways and the wrongs of these budget cuts that have happened to folks. And then I also want to be a part of the coalition of Georgia legislators at the federal level who are talking to whoever our new governor is in 2026, that you need to go ahead and participate in Medicaid and expand it, because and you've heard and you've probably championed that around that. And we also know that Georgia has the money to actually exercise and implement Medicaid expansion and full Medicaid within the state.
I'm so glad that you made that point, that the governor had the option to expand Medicaid and has chosen not to. And I think that that's very important, because I think for the average person, they tend to not understand where the power lies and who to really hold accountable. And that these systems can work collaboratively together, but also work against each other. So the federal government, you could be sitting on Capitol Hill and doing everything that you can for your constituents. But when it comes back to Georgia, that's why we have to show up for the midterms, because you're going to need that support to really get some change going. I want to talk about Black maternal health, which is probably something that's very close to you being a mother and a Black woman, and relates back to this topic of healthcare access, especially in rural communities. Black women in Georgia are dying in childbirth at rates that should be a national emergency. What does your healthcare platform do specifically towards Black maternal health? And why do you think that Congress has not done more on this issue?
Remember what I talked about when we said we love a study or a commission? Now listen, on the state level, because I was still working on the state level, we did have a Black maternal health care commission. We didn't really need that much study, but it needed a fiscal note and some money to bring those folks together in order to actually implement ways as in which to address this issue, right? They kind of worked around it and did certain things, like expanding paid federal, medical leave, family paid leave for, state employees, making some Medicaid options that we have. And I want to be very clear. The governor did decide he enhanced Medicaid with his own version of Medicaid expansion that was supposed to cover 50,000 people, and it's barely covering 10,000 people, and it's extremely expensive to the state. I don't want to say that.
Okay. We'll give him that. Okay.
Yeah, it's not a great program. And so specifically for my platform, though I don't mention it, it's just access to care. I mean, I hurt every time I hear that there's 159 counties in Georgia, 89 of them do not have an OBGYN. And how do I work with, state officials at that level of either how do we get them recruited? Is it because the state hasn't expanded Medicaid and that's why we're having all these issues with care to really find the answer. The answer is not just studying Black women, it's studying the system as which we operate healthcare. And what is happening that Black people and Black women specifically are falling into these gaps to the point of now where we're having a maternal crisis within this community. And there's several reasons why. They don't get care in time. By the time they're pregnant, they don't show up in time for those doctor's appointments. Again, transportation is actually a huge issue. How do they get to these doctor's appointments, especially those folks who live out a little bit further than where public transportation is accessible? Healthy living, healthy eating is also a big challenge. And that education as well. And some of these folks are pregnant in food deserts or in areas that do not have a sustainable, healthy diet for them. And they're surrounded by fast food and not a grocery store. And then also the financial investment, right? When folks get to that point, especially the studies that are showing, these women are now entering into emergency Medicaid that is only for a short amount of time to take care of short one thing. We're not doing the postpartum, and I know they did some expansions around that, but it's not enough. A postpartum care on Medicaid for folks who are on that program, but that's just folks who are on that program. What about the average woman who does have insurance through her job? How is she actually accessing healthcare? And she's running through the same challenges that these folks are too. And so I think everyone has to take a little bit of the responsibility here and decide that we are unsatisfied with how we've approached healthcare, especially around Black maternal health in this country, especially in this state. And we should all work together and figure out a way to address this issue.
So I also want to ask you, have the data centers reached your district yet?
No, but we have manufacturers. We have Honda.
Yes, this was the area. Absolutely. Okay. So
we've got a nickel plant that we would be the only area with the nickel refinery, which is extremely dangerous to water and to air. I mean, they say anyone can buy an ad to make sure that you say your state is number one for business in the country. It's not an independent study. It's just an ad that they buy by a tourism company. And, that ad has been running for 12 years. And that's been the running moniker of this government. And I would say more than anything, this place is the number one business for exploitive wages and polluters and folks who do not practice in good harm, who receive way too many tax credits at the federal and state level in order to provide subpar living situations for our residents.
So let's kind of get down to the nitty gritty of that, right? Because I don't think that it's coincidental that a lot of these things are happening in certain areas with certain demographics of residents. When we talk about the issue of environmental justice and the risk factors that come in with building a Hyundai plant, right? Who funds all of the energy that is being used? Where does the waste go? Does anyone care about, whether or not people have good drinking water or if it pollutes the ground that we're using to plant agriculture? What are you seeing in your district around, I guess, building up more manufacturing, and how does it negatively impact the residents of your district?
I hear it across the county. Everyone's like, well, why can't we get the big manufacturer? Why can't we get, the next company, especially when you get out into Wayne and Waycross, right? And Long County and those folks. And I hear them, but I don't think there's enough power in that voice of a community benefit agreement of like, when you show up, this is what it looks like. And this is what we're expecting. We're expecting, for you to help source affordable housing. We're expecting for you to help hire at least 30% of the labor market. If the labor market does not actually work for your industry, then you're helping us provide technical skills at the high school and technical college level where we can make sure our folks are getting trained up in order to work in your industry or at your manufacturer. And those are hard conversations to have because you don't want to deter them, because they have the upper hand. And I think people are afraid to make demands, but we have every right to make demands, especially if they're for the betterment of our community. And so, though we're not a data center place, we are in a water crisis here locally. Hyundai was able to privatize water. And so
Wow.
our aquifers are getting depleted. We have a higher rate of salt water salt within our water mixture. We also have a surface water problem and drainage. A lot of this, goes back to, I was just talking to some folks in Riceboro where, they were just like, our water infrastructure needs to be updated from what it originally was The challenge is that's going to cost more money. And now we know that everything's costing more money. How do you lay that out to folks that there's these problems on the horizon, but they can get worse if we don't pay attention to them. And so I am pro development. I don't want to say that. I'm very pro development. I'm pro business and trying to, really make sure that especially folks who are minority business owners getting the big contracts and getting in there and developing, because we know those dollars stay in that community longer. But I'm more pro how do we grow and develop sustainably to make sure that we're not actually doing harmful damage to the community that's long term and irreversible, but as well as providing an opportunity, a way of living.
So Georgia has been ground zero for voter suppression. We seem to actually be a hot spot, a hot area, especially as we're going into the midterm elections. We have been the victim of purge rolls, closed polling places, long lines, especially in Black neighborhoods. You've worked on voting rights for years. What is actually working? What is still broken? And what opportunities do we still have to correct some of this?
Listen, I'm going to give a hat tip off to former leader Stacey Abrams, who, when she saw the writing on the wall, got us all registered to vote. Got us all registered to vote so much that the governor now does automatic voter registration when you go and get your driver's license. And so 80%,
so that was not a thing before.
Isn't that amazing? But that's a form of voter suppression.
It is.
Making it hard to register to vote. And so it was going out in those streets. And like when I used to do voter registration, I would ride on a bus, public bus transportation, and register people to vote. I mean, it was that serious because we saw the numbers. It got so serious to the point where they were like, oh, we'll just make it automatic voter registration to make sure our people are too registered to vote. So now you almost have between like 70 and 80% of most Georgians are registered. In my district, there's around 42,000 people who are not registered to vote. 9 times out of 10, that is someone between 18 and 35 years old. So we just got to go find them, figure out what they're missing. They're probably missing an ID more than anything. We have a lower age group of folks who don't drive and get licenses anymore, and so because everything's delivery.
Yeah, everything is convenience.
Boy, we're paying for it though. And so I think part 2 is education. And so things that I'm tracking for the 2026 election, one is the education and misinformation. Because I know AI is fun and y'all like to make your little posters. Please spell check AI before you post the poster on Facebook, ma'am.
And people still fall for it.
Oh my God. Y'all giving these people all of your data. Like they will be able to find you anywhere. But what I do love, and we'll get back to this, is that there's this rumor that starts about, I don't want to register to vote because I don't want to be called into jury duty. I don't want to register to vote because I don't want the government to know everything about me. And I'm like, if you have a Gmail, the government knows you already. If you have a social security number, the government knows you already. The government knows you. Like, it is what it is. So no, you're not protecting yourself by not registering to vote. If you post on Facebook anything about yourself, the government knows you already. And so it's, there's that education. I would say part 2 of this is because we are not being careful of really trying to discern what is real and what is not. I'm very afraid for our midterm elections of folks going to vote on the wrong day, thinking they're getting a sample ballot, but it's from a bad actor. Hearing a lot of disinformation from talking heads online who will be paid to do disinformation, no doubt. I think the next part we're going to have a problem with is voter suppression looks like what are the issues, right? And so we just had the biggest scare tactic ever happen where he went and sent the FBI to sequester ballots from 2020 in Fulton County. I met Dana Barrett, who's one of the Fulton County commissioners, over the weekend. He has no constitutional rights over elections, none whatsoever. I know there's pending lawsuits coming down just around that issue because he wants to overtake elections and get a state of emergency. But y'all, that was a scare tactic. And that was a form of voter suppression because the visual of it all made us all go, well, I don't want to vote, or like, oh, it's not secured, or like, oh, he can just show up and just take our stuff. Listen, what they're doing is a psychological warfare on us because they're very afraid about what's going to happen for the 2026 midterm. And so we all have to have, we all have to be strong in our standing of understanding the Constitution, but also trust and believe, like you just need to ask questions and say, like, does this mean we're not having an election? So many people, as I go up around the campaign trail, say, like, do you think we're going to have elections? And I say, well, I know there's a lot of Republican and Democratic governors who want to be president, so I'm sure they have their druthers. They're having an election.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the third is just the candidates and how we're showing up. Are we showing up offering hope? Are we showing up offering inspiration? Or no, we also have to demand more of our candidacy as voters and ask them those hard questions, but also just say, I'm not settling for the okie doke anymore. This is not enough. Like, you can't say no more war and no more this. And, I'm going to fight Trump. Like, we need to talk about solutions, because what we need in 2026 are a bunch of people who are idea thinkers and solution focused, because we have got to get on the other side of this, because there are going to be so many people harmed once all of these cuts are actually enacted in the next 2 years.
So before your time with Color of Change, you were very active in When We All Vote. Do you take some of the blame for why this administration, specifically this president, is so obsessed with Georgia now?
And if I got to take the blame, I wear it on my shoulder. That is a badge of honor. I would say, let me have the energy and passion that this man has for his hate of Obama, because it started way back when, at that press dinner, and I have never seen a vendetta be executed so flawless.
It's very strange.
It's very strange, and he's sacrificing all of this for his insecurities as a person, and he's also just a bad person and corrupt and fleecing America at the same time. So he gets a double dip. So yes, I will take the blame that we got an engaged electorate in Georgia that gave us Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff, who's also running for re-election. I will take the blame that, folks are now turning out and getting educated and being registered to vote. And we probably have one of the higher acumen voters in the country in Georgia, especially in the South. Like, folks know what's up right out here, and you can have these tough conversations with people, and they're pretty much well versed in what is impacting us. And I will take the blame for helping a state turn purplish and I will also take the blame for helping a state turn bluish in 2026.
I feel like that's something you put on a jersey and you wear proudly, because outside of that, I think, especially as we are seeing all of these primary elections happen in the South, what happened in 2020 in Georgia is what's giving a lot of Southerners hope. Usually when we talk about any type of elections, south of the Mason-Dixon line, people are like, just give it up. They're always going to vote red. It is what it is. Of course, people not taking into account systemic racism and gerrymandering and all of these things that result in red states, or you being a blue dot in a red state. But Georgia really showed people what is possible. And I think Georgia also showed that both sides have common interests. There are farming communities that identify as Republican and Democratic. We have a shared interest. If you are a mother, you have a shared interest with another mother who may consider themselves a part of the other side. So I really think that Georgia showed people what is possible. But I think it's important for people to know that the work that you have done leading up until this time has been extremely impactful, not just for the state of Georgia, but really the country. Continuing on the topic of voting, there are a lot of Black voters, especially young ones. You pointed out that most of the demographic of people who have not registered to vote yet are between the ages of 18 and 35. A lot of them have the sentiment that they do not want to participate at all. They think that elections are a scam. They feel like their votes don't matter. And for a lot of them coming out of the 2024 election, they feel as though there's no point in voting because the powers that be are going to choose who they choose regardless. They showed up and they felt like it didn't matter. What do you say to that demographic, which is now becoming the majority of the electorate? What do you say about why it's important for them to turn out now, probably more than ever?
So first of all, I think the default to I don't vote is because I don't understand how to vote. And so we are leaning way into the I don't vote instead of asking, why do you not vote? And I know when I talk to canvassers, they're like, I go to these places and these folks, they don't want to vote. And I say, people die for your vote. And I'm like, yeah. I go, what does their home look like? And they'll say, well, it's a little rundown and it looks a little like this and it's a little that. And I said, so this person probably has been living there a couple of years, maybe 5. and you've decided to come knock on their door and tell them that they need to go vote, and their station in life has not changed. It didn't matter who the president was. It didn't matter who the governor was. It didn't matter. And I said, so you're going to have a hard time convincing someone their vote matters when no one has addressed what is actually hurting them. And so more than anything, what you should do is ask them, what are the issues you care about? What would how do you feel that you're impacted versus you need to go out and vote? Because organizing is not showing up during early voting and knocking on doors. Organizing is deep. Organizing is showing people that there's ways to improve their lives. Organizing is actually hearing the stories and showing them why this is happening to them and not just being defeatist. And so I tell people, you've got to do deep organizing in the South. You got to sit in it and hear this person's story in order to really figure out what is the no. Now, with that being said, say we move them to going to go vote. They don't know they're allowed to go vote on their lunch break. They don't know their legal rights around voting, right? And then on top of that, like I use my son as an example, but when his first time going to go vote, I went and read the ballot first. And I said, there's a constitutional amendment on that. Like he's not going to know what to do, where to do that. And so I wrote him a cheat sheet. And he took that cheat sheet, because you can't use your phone, into the voting booth and was able to vote confidently because he understood what was happening. Not everyone gets that. And I remember when he walked out, I was waiting for him outside and his friends were in line to go vote. And he was like, take my mom's cheat sheet. It's going to make everything easier. Right? There's a lot of pre-work that has to happen before you go vote, because there are things called, what is a SPLOS? What is a millage tax? And, why are we trying to amend the Constitution for gambling? There's some work that we have to do on in our communities, especially those of us who are the trusted voice of voting in our families and our neighbors, around our neighbors, to say, like, I need you to go read the ballot first. And if there's something on there that you don't understand, let me help you understand that. Or here are some resources: Ballotpedia, which is a little, chunky, but it works. A Ballot Ready, which you just put in your address and it actually breaks down all the amendments for you. And then there's also, I hope to God this year we get back into providing scorecards on issues and scorecards on candidates and sending those mailers out, and also doing sample ballots in newspapers so people can see it.
So how do you earn the trust from a community that may have every reason to be skeptical of the voting process or even going out to vote?
I mean, we're not going to earn their trust. The primary in Georgia is May 19th. We're not going to earn their trust on April 3rd. We earn their trust in January, in summer. And if you have any intention on running for office, or if you care about this state, you've been organizing and reaching out to this community and sharing messages on social media and trying to provide a way to engage this community. You've been showing up, but showing up them last 3 weeks before that voting day, we're not earning trust. People are going to say that this is a little negative, but I just think I'm a realist. I mean, we'll probably increase voter turnout by 20% going out there and talking to those folks. But imagine if we organized all year round and engage these people all year round and try to help them all year round, what turnout would look like on election day when we intentionally invest in these communities that have low voter turnout.
Yeah, I love that. I think that, to your point, people come out when it's time to ask for a vote, when there's a call to action. There seems to be a lack of civic engagement and education in that in-between time. And that's when you develop the trust, because people see you and know what you're about. Now, you're running a grassroots campaign, but campaigns are expensive. How do you stay accountable to regular people in a system that's built around corporate donors and PAC money?
I will not be taking corporate PAC money, but that means that, like, I'm splitting a donation pool amongst 40 plus odd candidates here in Georgia, and we're going to have to raise money outside of the state. And we need election reform. We need financing reform in elections, period. We're not getting our best, we're getting our richest and our most well-connected. And it hurts my heart. And, I hope that I can get there with the money when it's time for me to get to the general. I know it's going to be a struggle and it's going to be hard. But I hope people believe enough that they're willing to give me, their treasure, what they've worked hard for, to support a really people first, energetic, human centered campaign.
From an education standpoint, most people don't understand how expensive it is to run a campaign. Can you kind of talk about all of the things that are necessary for your campaign to power it? What do you need money for?
Oh my God. Voter contact is the thing, right? And I can be in a million parades. I can be in all the things, but like sending postcards, so mail and postage, just being able to have a team, like a campaign manager, a field director, someone to look at the data and to recruit volunteers to start doing those phone banks, those texting. I know y'all don't like it, but it takes 7 touches to get somebody to go vote. That's just what it is. We passed out 3,000 pieces of literature. Well, you got to get that designed and you got to get that printed, right? The yard signs, the T-shirts, all the stuff that makes the campaign have that energy and that look costs money. And like just me sending an email to my voters who joined my list cost me, every 1,000 emails cost me 25 cents. I tell someone, I said, you could go to the big guys, to the big senators and give your $25 and that just adds to their coffers. You give me $25. I'm sending 20,000 emails that morning. I'm very resourceful, but yeah, you pay for everything, on the road, the gas to go all over this district. This isn't just magic. It isn't like, I'm self-funding a lot of my stuff, but, and I've had amazing fundraisers here locally. But yeah, everything you see around a campaign costs money.
And I think that's important for people to know. I think people also assume that the party helps to fund candidates. The party decides what elections matter the most to them, and that is who gets the funding. That includes states, right? They strategically look at what states they want to fund, and then everyone else is kind of on their own. So I think it's important. People see the emails, they get the text messages, they see the call to action, and they're like, why do you need my money? It's important to understand these campaigns are expensive. And if you want people that look like you up on Capitol Hill, that understand your lived experience, you got to send them there. And sometimes it costs getting your coin purse and giving a little something, $1, $5, your time, whatever you can. So in 5 years' time, should you be elected, what does Georgia's 1st Congressional District look like?
Thriving. It looks like a community that's been heard. It looks like a congresswoman that has been showing up with town halls and information, doing surveys, having an office in North Jordan, in North District, and South District. It looks like Amanda has been showing up even for the tiniest parade. And I want those folks to feel fulfilled that they've at least been seen. We might not get everything done because there's a lot to do. But I want in 5 years from now, when someone comes and thinks about if I run again in 5 years from now, thinks about the re-election, they can say, she didn't get all of it, but what did she fight? And you can find me at Amanda Ford, Georgia. It's AmandaForga.com. If you want to do social on Instagram, I'm Amanda, the number 4GA, and that's the same for Facebook.
Amanda, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.